We are the CRAM Group, and this is our project visiting the National Museum of Anthropology and the National Museum of Fine Arts. While entering the museums, we thought that we would just see paintings, clothes, and artifacts. But as we continued walking through the galleries, we noticed that many of the objects were actually telling stories about how Filipinos live, believe, and relate to each other. As a group, we realized that these artworks reveal patterns about Filipino culture, especially family, faith, tradition, craftsmanship, and community life. To understand these patterns better, we used the ideas of T.S. Eliot and Roger Scruton.
According to T.S. Eliot, culture can be understood in three senses: the individual development of a person, the culture of a group or class, and the culture of a whole society. When we look at the museum collections, we can see all three. Some artworks show personal expression, some show the tradition of specific communities, and many reveal the shared values of Filipino society as a whole. Meanwhile, Roger Scruton explains that culture becomes significant when people see it as meaningful and worth preserving. Cultural objects matter not only because they exist, but because people feel connected to them emotionally and historically. Using these ideas, our group examined several artifacts from the museum and identified patterns that reveal the deeper meaning of Filipino culture. One artifact I observed was the traditional attire of the Gadang people. The clothing is decorated with colorful woven fabric and beadwork. These garments are usually worn during rituals, celebrations, and important cultural events. Using T.S. Eliot's idea, this artifact represents the culture of a specific community. It shows how traditions like weaving and clothing design are part of the everyday life of the Gadang people. For me, this reminds us that Filipino culture is not just one singular culture. It is made out of many indigenous communities with their own traditions and identities. From the perspective of Roger Scruton, this attire becomes culturally significant because it carries meaning for the people who wear it. Even if it's not commonly used in modern fashion today, it still represents heritage, identity, and pride.
Another example is the garment designed by Patis de Soro, which uses abaca fiber and traditional design elements. This artifact shows how Filipino designers combine traditional materials with modern creativity. Through the lens of Eliot's idea, this reflects how culture evolves through time. Traditional practices like weaving do not disappear. Instead, they are adapted and expressed in new ways. For Scruton, this type of work is meaningful because it keeps cultural traditions alive while making them relevant to contemporary society. Another important artifact is the Abel attire worn by Magdalena Gamayo, a recognized manlilikha ng bayan. This clothing represents the tradition of Abel Iloco weaving, which has been passed down for generations. From Eliot's perspective, this shows how cultural knowledge is transmitted within communities, shaping their collective identity. From Scruton's perspective, the artifact becomes culturally significant because it represents a living tradition that Filipino value and want to preserve.
One artifact that stood out to me was Anito, which represents spiritual beliefs in northern Luzon. It shows how communities honor spirits and ancestors through rituals and prayers. Through the framework of T.S. Eliot, this reflects how religion and spiritual practices form part of the shared worldview of society. These rituals are not just beliefs, they shape how people treat illness, death, and community relationships. According to Roger Scruton, traditions like this are culturally meaningful because they connect people through their history and identity. Another important artifact is the Doctrina Christiana, one of the earliest printed books in the Philippines. It contains Christian teachings written in Spanish and Baybayin. Through Eliot's idea, this shows how religion became integrated into the cultural life of Filipino society during the colonial period. It influenced education, traditions, and moral values. From Scruton's perspective, the book remains culturally significant because it represents an important moment in the formation of Filipino religious identity. Another strong example is the Black Nazarene. Millions of Filipinos participate in its procession every year. Through Eliot's framework, this tradition shows how religion becomes a shared social experience that strengthens community bonds. From Scruton's perspective, the devotion surrounding the Black Nazarene shows that culture becomes meaningful when people feel personally connected to it.
One artwork that reflects Filipino values is Portrait of Loriana Novicio Ioctured by Juan Luna. This painting portrays the artist's mother. For me, this artwork reflects the Filipino value of respecting and honoring parents. Through T.S. Eliot's idea, family relationships are part of the everyday structure of society. The painting reflects how respect and gratitude toward parents are deeply embedded in Filipino culture. From Roger Scruton's perspective, the artwork is meaningful because many people can emotionally relate to the bond between a parent and a child. Another artwork is Mother and Child by Napoleon Abueva. The sculpture shows a mother holding her child. This artwork highlights the importance of family care and emotional connection. Through Eliot's concept, this reflects how family life forms the foundation of social relationships. Through Scruton's perspective, the artwork becomes culturally meaningful because it expresses universal emotions that people recognize and value. Another painting is Abogasya by Manny Garibay. This artwork deals with themes of justice and social issues. Through Eliot's framework, cultures also includes the political and social realities that affect people's lives. Through Scruton's idea, art like this becomes meaningful because it encourages reflection about society and justice.
One example I observed was the photographs of indigenous peoples of the Philippines. These photos show families, homes, and everyday activities. Through T.S. Eliot's perspective, culture includes the ordinary routines of daily life. And these images show how people live, work, and interact in their communities. And through Roger Scruton's idea, these photographs become meaningful because they preserve the identity of indigenous cultures. Another image is the Tingyan weavers from 1904. The photo shows women weaving cloth together using traditional tools. This represents the role of craftsmanship and cooperation in indigenous communities. Through Eliot's idea, work and labor are part of the social fabric of culture. And through Scruton's idea, this activity is culturally significant because it represents a tradition that communities continue to value. Another artwork is The Mother and Child by Cesar Legaspi. The abstract painting shows the emotional bond between a mother and a child. Even though the style is modern and abstract, the theme still reflects Filipino family values. Through Eliot's framework, this shows how cultural themes remain consistent even as artistic style changes. Through Scruton's idea, the painting is meaningful because it expresses emotions that many people recognize and value. After examining different artworks and artifacts in the museum, our group identified several patterns in Filipino culture. These include family relationships, religious devotion, traditional craftsmanship, and strong community connections. Using T.S. Eliot's framework, we can see that culture is not limited to art itself. Instead, it reflects the entire way of life of Filipino society. At the same time, Roger Scruton's idea of cultural significance helps explain why these objects continue to matter today. They are meaningful because they connect people to their history, identity, and shared values. Through the museum collections, we can see that Filipino culture is expressed not only through artistic creativity but also through the beliefs, traditions, and the relationships that shape everyday life. Seeing these artifacts in person made us realize that culture is not just something written in history books. It is something that people continue to live, practice, and preserve today. Through the collections of the National Museum, we can better understand how Filipino culture continues to shape the lives and the values of society.